Hi, and welcome to the show where we share the stories of the many who intersect with our healthcare system but are rarely heard from. My name is Kevin Poe, founder and editor of Kevin MD. And today on the show, we have Anthony Flegg. He's a family physician in New Mexico. He's a Kevin MD contributor. He wrote the articles, The Superpower of Being Present, and Take a Gratitude Perspective on Coronavirus. Anthony, welcome to the show.
It's great to be here, Kevin.
So I was wondering if you could start by sharing your story and your journey to where you are today.
Be happy to. Grew up thinking that I might be interested in health fields and actually more gravitated to public health, and following kind of an undergraduate tenure at Haverford College in Philly, went to teach elementary school. And it was in that process that, believe it or not, it was actually a public health admissions officer at Johns Hopkins that basically sat me down and said, hearing what you want to do, I think you need to go to med school. So kind of a neat moment where someone who's paid to convince people to go to public health, says, no, you might get an MPH later, but you need to go to med school. So I've always been interested in taking care of populations that are underserved medically and in the larger kind of way. So that just led me to family medicine through UNC Chapel Hill, and did end up getting a master's in public health. Ended up in Albuquerque, New Mexico, where I now serve as a faculty member in family medicine.
And how has the pandemic affected you and your practice?
Kevin, in a slightly humorous way, I miss no shows. Like I have a conversational style. I like to know my patients really as people and not just as medicalized beings. And so I am really struggling, honestly, when I have 100% of my patients showing. And it's I know has a lot of conveniences from a patient standpoint of not having to come into a clinic, but I definitely feel more drained. And I don't think it's just that. I think it's just the trying to do medicine, feeling like your hands are kind of tied. You don't have vitals, you can't get labs, you can't look at those rashes. And to do that over and over, I think there's a real mental strain that all of us in medicine, and particularly, primary care providers, I think, are feeling right now.
Is there anything that you've learned over the last few months that you would like to share with your fellow primary care clinicians?
My first, I documented in all of my notes, my first thing to talk about is the patient's mindset and perspective related to the pandemic. So I think it's really helped me just get a sense before we dive into blood sugars or, a knee pain, to really get a sense of like, what is your mindset right now? How are you choosing to meet this moment? And just that question gives me a real window into what the pandemic looks like for them. And in some people's answers are completely inspiring and teach me, and in other people I can immediately say, whoa, we're not going to deal with blood sugar control today. We're going to deal with this is just going to be Anthony as a social worker and as a support for this person. So that's probably my biggest thing that I think I've learned, that if I don't do it, just maybe at the end of the conversation I realize everything else I focused on really wasn't what that person needed at that moment.
Sure. So you also started a blog, Writing to Heal, and your 2 Kevin MD articles came from your blog. What was the impetus for you starting to write?
I've always enjoyed writing. I've been a poet, spoken word poet, and have written kind of from time to time. Medicine, as one of my many excuses, doesn't allow a whole lot of extra space for sitting to write. And I think the convergence of factors and just the intensity of everything that I was seeing around the pandemic, along with just my sense that what I didn't see enough of were really the other angles, how are we learning from this? How are we going to emerge, all of us, regardless of our age and our profession? How are we going to emerge better people? How are we going to treat our planet better? How are we going to, as things have emerged, my question would now be, how can we create a more equitable, a more just, a less racist society? And so all of that has, I think, been part of my reason to write and share with them, but it's also one of my best ways to deal with those grappling with those issues just for myself is to put it on paper.
Sure. So let's talk about your Kevin MD articles. The first one, take a gratitude perspective on coronavirus. It's a very positive, inspirational piece, and we can certainly use more of that during these times. Can you share the story behind that article and why you decided to write it?
Sitting at the dinner table, looked at my kids. The question for my 11, 9, and 5-year-olds was, what is this really trying to teach us? And this was maybe a couple weeks into the pandemic. And my 11-year-old was the first to just very quickly answer, appreciate life, appreciate our health, appreciate small things we don't always think about. And that to me was profound in a moment that I was being bombarded by emails and news that had nothing but doomsday kind of predictions. My 11-year-old daughter says, no, that this is teaching us, how precious this time on the planet that we get is. And so from that, I scribbled a piece, and it started kind of a tradition of every Wednesday night, once the kids are in bed, sitting down, blank piece of paper, nothing really thought out, nothing really carefully researched, and just what comes to me is what I write about.
Sure. And what are some of the other topics that you've delved in?
A very recent one was a conversation around a garden with a friend, and he kind of commented that the strawberry plant gives you two options. You either cut its flowers and force it to put its energy into growing deep roots, or if you're really greedy and you want 2 or 3 berries that first year, you let it do its thing, but you're not going to grow a strong plant. And in the moment of all of the unrest, to me, that was a very beautiful analogy to, maybe our best thing right now is to grow deep roots into thinking of how we change things, and not necessarily reaching for the one berry that we can get in 2020.
Sure. So you wrote a second article, The Superpower of Being Present. Again, that article got inspiration from your kids. So tell me again the story of that article and why you decided to write that.
Kevin, most of us in health and healthcare particularly probably would say that 30 to 50% of our energy is spent on helping people deal with anxiety and stress, and particularly, and I mean that in the pandemic specifically, and anxiety and stress over what's July going to look like, what's August going to look like. And I looked at my 2-year-old, and in this case, I didn't even need to hear anything. I just kind of had a moment where I thought, if I commanded in my most fatherly voice this little one to worry about even 30 minutes from now, much less tomorrow or 3 days from now, so they literally have this superpower that prevents them from living anywhere but in the present. And almost the idea of channeling that inner child in all of us, I can't change what happened yesterday, and worrying all day today about what's going to happen tomorrow or next month ain't going to change that either. Let's really just focus even more so in the pandemic of being present and being in the present.
It's amazing how much wisdom we can garner from our kids. I have 2 daughters, a little bit older than your kids, 11 and 15 years old, and sometimes asking about how they see the world through their eyes, to me, is very inspiring.
Yeah, absolutely. They have a lot to teach us if we're able to listen.
So let's take a step back. Tell me something that you've been curious about or something that you've been passionate about recently.
I really am someone who considers myself a movement activist, believe deeply in the power of movement to heal. And I think in this moment, and have a group here in Albuquerque called Running Medicine that does just that. We treat running and movement as medicine for mind, body, and spirit, not just like physical, run your best 5K, but all the other aspects. And I absolutely prescribe it in my work. So just a passion has been over these last months, how do we now get creative and inspire people to move virtually, even though we're not meeting in big, exciting groups all together?
And my final question, Anthony, what's your take-home message for the Kevin MD audience?
Find what inspires you. Find what gives you medicine beyond your paid job, your school life, your credit hours, and dig into that, art form or creative outlet, spiritual outlet, and really make it something that is equally important to you as what pays the bills or what gets you passing grades in the formal lines of study.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your insight. We've been talking to Anthony Flegg. He is a family physician in New Mexico. He blogs at the site Writing to Heal, and he wrote the Kevin MD articles, The Superpower of Being Present, and Take a Gratitude Perspective on Coronavirus. Anthony, thank you so much for joining me on the show.
Kevin, it was a pleasure, and I hope to have some more material for your readers shortly.
Great. Thank you so much.